Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest aliens and UFOs video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's continue with part 3 of chapter 1 of the UFO Sightings book by Alan Baker. This chapter again chronicling the cases associated with close encounters of the first kind. In fact, that's the name of the chapter itself. So this continues a myriad of examples and encounters that people have had with various UFOs throughout various times here in America and across other parts of the world too. So this part will just continue that essentially, and then I'll do another part afterward, which I believe should wrap up the chapter, and then I'll give my own thoughts and opinions on everything afterward too. Looks like there's a lot of positive responses to this book. Lots of people liking the multitude of examples. I love them too. It's basically a encyclopedia of so much great evidence to showcase here. So without further ado, let's continue again. Part 3, Chapter 1, Close Encounters of the First Kind. So here's the next part. It's called the Celada Colorado Footage. On August 27th, 1996, the town of Salida, Colorado became the center of the UFO map when restaurant owner Tim Edwards captured video footage of an astonishing object sailing through the skies. The footage was shown on American TV news broadcasts and syndicated shows such as Sightings. According to Edwards, the first experience was truly awesome. I felt deeply at the time that I was witnessing something of a great scientific and historic importance for the world. I believe that the August 27th craft was sending a message to the world and wanted to be photographed, that its appearance was somehow just the beginning of more to come, and that I was really fortunate to be a part of it. The object Edwards videotaped was cigar-shaped and apparently flying at a high altitude. Its behavior was described as unprecedented even for a UFO, and included intense white lights that hurled around its base. Edwards also recorded several smaller UFOs, which appeared as bright balls that performed numerous darting maneuvers around the mothership. The UFOs were subsequently seen by hundreds of other witnesses in and around Salida. According to the National UFO Reporting Center, Edwards' sightings resulted in a nationwide wave of reports numbering thousands. The Salida footage was sent for analysis to Village Labs, a video and film design facility in Glendale, Arizona. It was also analyzed by Dr. Jack Kasher of the University of Nebraska and other media technology facilities in San Antonio, Texas. According to Vance Davies, a Village Labs staff consultant formerly with the National Security Agency, the object witnessed by Edwards and others was flying at 10,000 miles per hour at an altitude of approximately 60,000 feet. Davis has classified this object as an alien visitation craft, or AVC, apparently an NSA term to designate a vehicle that is definitely not one of ours. One of the most astonishing aspects of this sighting is the sheer size of the UFO, estimated by Village Labs to be somewhere between 700 feet and almost a mile in length. It was also noted that the object must have had prodigious energy requirements, not only to keep it in the air, but also to power the gigantic lights around its base, each of which was estimated to be between 100 to 200 square feet. According to John Delatoso, the founder of Village Labs, the power requirements of this object were equivalent to taking the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York, laying them in on them, and trying to make them fly up into the atmosphere. The Salida footage was also described as unusually clear, with a large number of additional objects, such as a roofline, birds, and airborne debris, providing excellent frames of reference in the calculation of the distance between the object and the camera. By this means, the object was also shown to be definitely three-dimensional and not a reflected image. According to the British UFO magazine, September-October 1996, recent examination of the footage has revealed photographic evidence for a self-contained energy field, or envelope, surrounding the large object. Features of this kind have frequently been suggested by ufologists to be the only way that genuine alien aircraft could defy gravity and perform the astonishing maneuvers reported. Since he has taken more footage of the strange objects over Salida, according to date over 20 hours worth, Tim Edwards has centered the category of so-called repeat witness and has come in for some close scrutiny from skeptics and debunkers. Undaunted by this adverse attention, Tim Edwards told newspaper reporters, this time, with dozens of witnesses here in Salida and many others that were hundreds of miles away that I have talked directly to over the phone, there's no denying that something very unusual has been going on up there. Next segment, UFO over Hawaii. When Mike Page, a 36-year-old piano polisher from Hartford, England, went to Hawaii for the holiday of a lifetime, he had no idea that he would also take the photograph of a lifetime. On the spectacular island of Maui, along with many other tourists marveling at the beautiful scenery, Page took a number of photographs and some Super 8 cine footage before returning to his hotel and taking the film to be developed. When he collected the prints and inspected them, he saw something that astonished him. In disbelief, he said to a friend, "Look at this, it's a flying saucer. I've taken a picture of a flying saucer." In one photograph of a tall, monolithic hill, an elongated, cigar-shaped object seemed to be hanging eerily in the background. According to Page, he had not seen anything unusual when he took the picture. He was concentrating on getting a good panoramic shot of the scenery at the time, so this seems understandable since the object itself is partially cloaked in a humid haze. Although these photographs were taken in 1989 and copies of them have been in the files of various researchers since then, it was not until 1996 that a serious effort to analyze them was undertaken by UFO magazine. Prior to 1996, several possible explanations have been put forward, such as a flaw in the emulation of the photographic film and even a secret visit by the Northrop B-2 stealth bomber. When Page contacted UFO magazine, they began an investigation in which Kodak was enlisted to provide an analysis of the image. The negatives were sent to John Griffiths of Kodak's customer care department at Hemel Hempstead, Hertfordshire. Griffiths told Mark Birdsall of the UFO magazine that over the years, Kodak has examined many photographs of unusual objects, including UFOs and the Loch Ness Monster. He thus considered his department to be experienced in these matters. On November 25, 1996, Griffiths telephoned Mark Birdsall after having examined the photographic negatives. This preliminary examination had been intended to confirm that there were no emulation flaws. According to Griffiths, there was no problem with the film itself. It appears whatever is in the sky is in the sky. The grain of the object is consistent with an object photographed in the distance. However, my gut feeling is that the object could be an airliner in ascent. This opinion was later endorsed by Mike Manning, head of the department, who wrote to Mike Birdsall saying that although there was no evidence of any disturbance to the emulation of the film, they nevertheless believed that the object photographed was an airliner flying from left to right with light hitting the wing and tailplane, resulting in two apparent lights on the image. However, when UFO Magazine's editor Graham Birdsall subsequently attended a conference in Hawaii, he asked local UFO researchers to comment on Kodak's conclusions. The consensus was that no airliner uses that flight path out of Maui's small airport. In addition, it seems likely that Mike Page would have heard the engine noise from a large aircraft at fairly close range, yet he maintains he heard nothing of the sort when he took the photographs. As to the idea that the object might be a Northrop B-2 stealth bomber, that too seems unlikely. For instance, if the photographs show the front of the aircraft, that is, approaching the camera, then the two bright lights are in the wrong position to be running lights with on the B-2, as they are mounted on the undercarriage and thus will not be visible unless the undercarriage were down. If, on the other hand, the photograph shows the rear of the aircraft traveling away from the camera, then the two lights are in the wrong position to be engine exhaust, since the engine nozzles on the B-2 are located on the upper surface of the aircraft, whereas the lights on the Hawaii UFO are clearly on the underside. These considerations mean the object in Mike Page's photographs, which the reader will note is strikingly similar to the Celada Colorado object, remains unexplained. The editors of UFO magazine are continuing their analysis of the image and will be subjecting it to a computer enhancement in the future. Perhaps then, hopefully, this enigmatic image will reveal its secret. Next segment, sightings by astronauts. Is the truth out there? If some UFOs are actually spacecraft operating by beings from other worlds, we might expect their presence to be observed on occasion by our own astronauts during space missions. Although many people lament our lack of manned planetary exploration in the wake of the triumphant Apollo program in the late 1960s and early 70s, we are nevertheless establishing a greater presence in near-Earth space with the now routine flights of the American Space Shuttle and the Russian Mir space station. In addition, when the International Space Station Alpha is finally constructed, it will most likely serve as a shipyard and jumping off point for manned missions to the Moon and Mars. So, if extraterrestrial UFOs have been observed by people on the surface of their planet, then surely they must have been seen in outer space by our astronauts. It would seem that this is indeed the case, with many UFOs having been seen and reported by NASA crews. An early sighting was made by James McDivitt during his Gemini 4 flight with Ed White on June 4, 1965. During the capsule's drifting flight, McDivitt noticed a cylindrical object with a high fitness ratio ahead of their spacecraft. From one end of the object protruded a long cylindrical pole with the appropriate fineness of a pencil. Owing to the conditions in the vacuum of the space, McDivitt was unable to determine the size of the object or its distance from the Gemini capsule. According to him, it could have been very small and near or very large and far away. Nevertheless, he turned on the capsule's control system in case it became necessary to take evasive action. McDivitt tried to photograph the object with the two cameras they had on board, but since it was only in his field of view for a few seconds, he had to use the cameras at whatever settings they had at the time. After the object had disappeared from view, he was unable to relocate it. The camera films were flown back to Houston as soon as Gemini 4 landed. According to McDivitt, a film technician at NASA selected what he thought were the relevant photographs of the UFO and subjected them to analysis. However, these photographs showed sunspots or flares on the window and not the object McDivitt had seen and photographed. When the astronaut returned from the aircraft carrier 3 days after landing, he went through the photographs himself but could find nothing that looked like the UFO. Evidently, the camera settings had been wrong after all. According to James Oberg of NASA, the object encountered by Gemini 4 was actually the second stage of the Titan, which had launched the capsule into orbit. However, as ufologist Timothy Good states, it is rather puzzling that McDivitt should fail to recognize his own rocket. For his own part, James McDivitt maintains that although he doesn't think the object was genuinely anomalous, it was still unidentified and was certainly not the upper stage of a rocket. When he checked the records, they revealed that there were no upper stages or rockets anywhere near the Gemini capsule at the time of the sighting. The next NASA encounter of a UFO occurred above Gemini 5, crewed by Gordon Cooper and Charles Conrad. On the third day of their mission, August 24, 1965, as they were passing over Cape Canaveral, then Cape Kennedy, the Gemini flight director, Christopher Kraft, asked them if they could see anything flying alongside them. Kraft radioed to them, "We have a radar image of a space object going right along with you from 2,000 to 10,000 yards away. The radar return is approximately the same magnitude as Gemini 5. The object was tracked until both it and Gemini 5 were lost beyond the curvature of the Earth. By the time the capsule came within range of the tracking station at Carnarvon, Australia, the UFO had departed." Another UFO was encountered by the crew of the Gemini 7, Jim Lovell and Frank Borman, as the following transcript states. "This is Houston. Say again, 7. I said we had a bogey at 10 o'clock high. Gemini 7, is that the booster or is that an actual sighting? We have several. It looks like debris up here, actual sighting. Is there an estimated distance or size? We also have the booster in sight." In his assessment of the case, Condon Committee investigator Franklin Roach suggested that the bogey might have been a large fragment from the launching of the Gemini 7. However, he qualified this by adding that it would be impossible if the UFO was traveling in a polar orbit, as was apparently the case. The crew of Apollo 9 were also alleged to have encountered extraterrestrial vehicles, both during transit to the moon and after making the historic landing there on July 21st, 1969. The first sighting occurred when the moon ship was only 1 day out from Earth. After spotting an unusual object between their craft and the moon, they radioed Mission Control to ask if it was the Saturn V booster rocket. Houston replied that the booster was 6,000 miles away. Neil Armstrong described the object as being like an open suitcase. Viewed through a sextant within the instruments just off focus, the UFO took on a different shape, now appearing as two hollow cylinders. As it rotated, its interior could clearly be seen. When the sextant was focused correctly, the object returned to its open book shape. According to persistent rumors, as soon as the Lunar Excursion Module Eagle arrived at the Sea of Tranquility, Neil Armstrong and Edwin Buzz Aldrin watched a number of very large spacecraft land near them. Dr. Vladimir Azhaza, professor of mathematics at Moscow University, claims that Armstrong's message to Mission Control, confirming the presence of UFOs on the moon, was censored by NASA, and that the UFOs departed soon after the astronauts began their moonwalk. Another even wilder story has it that the number of alien beings disembarked from one of the UFOs stood on the lunar surface watching the Eagle. Mission Control then ordered Armstrong to remain inside the LEM and under no circumstances to venture out into the surface while the aliens were nearby, an order he disobeyed. Personally, I find it hard to imagine Armstrong making his cool and collected one small step for man speech with a number of possibly hostile alien beings a few hundred yards away. Some of these claims were supported by Maurice Chatelain, a former NASA communications specialist, who said in 1979 that NASA interrupted Apollo 9's radio transmissions on several occasions to keep the truth from the people of the world. According to NASA's chief spokesman John McLeish, however, the agency did no such thing. The only delay in the transmissions from the moon occurred as a result of processing through electronic equipment, and this delay was very slight. The only actual break in transmissions occurred when the spacecraft was on the far side of the moon, and the only conversations that were never made public were those of a private nature between the astronauts and their doctors. Next segment, an object headed for the moon in 1958. In his 1959 book, Stranger Than Science, the American journalist Frank Edwards tells an intriguing story from the early days of the space age. In October 1958, exactly 1 year after the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite to orbit the Earth, the Cape Canaveral Missile Center in Florida began to pick up powerful radio signals from an unknown object that was apparently moving between the Earth and the moon. The signals were detected for approximately 3 hours each day, and the scientists at the Cape quickly alerted their colleagues at radio tracking stations around the world, each of which recorded the signals and immediately set to work attempting to plot the precise position of the device. The most incredible discovery that was made was that the object was headed for the moon at approximately 9,000 miles per hour, although this speed was constantly changing. It had been assumed that the object was a Soviet rocket that had been launched in secret, but the variations in the object's speed ruled out this explanation. No known rocket could speed up and slow down as this object appeared to be doing. In addition, U.S. intelligence sources confirmed that the Soviets had not made any launches during the period that the unknown device came to the scientists' attention. The calculations were then rechecked. The object had first been detected approximately 3,000 miles from the Earth, following a course that would take it to the moon. However, as the scientists on Earth continued to track it with astonishment, it reduced speed, then twice accelerated rapidly, before finally altering its course and heading off into deep space. Since the initial assumption had been that the object was a secret Soviet moon probe, Cape Canaveral had no qualms in releasing the information to the public. However, when it became apparent that they were dealing with something else entirely different, there was a frantic scramble to explain the object. As Frank Edwards puts it, the customary pattern of multiple explanations was pursued. This consists of having several allegedly explanatory statements released in rapid sequence, varying in nature but all dealing with the same incident. This achieves the desired goal of creating doubt and confusion while at the same time explaining nothing. Thus, one of the explanations was that the signals detected were similar to those transmitted by Sputnik 1. This was not terribly helpful since Sputnik 1 no longer existed, having re-entered the Earth's atmosphere and been destroyed. Another statement had it that Cape Canaveral and the other tracking stations had detected the ionized gases from rocket exhaust fumes. Of course, radio telescopes cannot track rocket exhaust fumes. The object tracked on its way to the moon has never been adequately explained. All we know was that it was there and was doing things that no human-built crafts were capable of doing back in 1958. Let's go ahead and let's stop it here then for this part 3 of Chapter 1, Close Encounters of the First Kind. Lots of good stuff to talk about here. First off, that big one there, the Celada Colorado UFO. Never heard of that one. I don't think I've covered that one before. I think I would have remembered, especially when you have something that's traveling an astonishing 10,000 miles per hour. Holy crap. Can you imagine something like that? 10,000 miles per hour. Oh, and let's not forget, it's a mile in length. We're talking something like in the world of Independence Day. Remember those giant citywide type UFOs, for lack of a better term, the ones that went over New York and so on? Well, apparently such a thing was making its appearance there in Colorado. How about that, right? I think I might talk about this sometime soon in the future. But yeah, apparently this remains, according to the chapter, one of the best known images or videos associated with something. Then there was the information about the UFO over Hawaii, another fascinating thing. The biggest thing, though, was this. I had no idea, really, there were so many detailed sightings so far by astronauts. And then the idea that they were done by multiple astronauts over multiple flights, each one of them asking if there was something happening in the sky, something nearby, and then them being told, almost like in a token type answer, that yes, there is something, but it's a rocket, or there is something, but it's like a lens flare, something along those lines, or the evidence just not showcasing there. One thing I do have a little bit of doubt on, it was even the author was mentioning it, was the idea that there was these alien spacecraft that were there on the moon the same time that the first big landing was occurring. Not only that, but that there were some aliens outside as well visiting them and so on. Again, it makes you wonder how that could be, because even with super secrecy, it would have been discovered at some point. Like there would have been something come out. Maybe there was some transmissions that were halted, but even then, that's a stretch there. But that was really fascinating to read too, almost eerie. I was kind of getting goosebumps on there. The idea that they were landing there, and then lo and behold, there's also some UFOs waiting, and they had some aliens come out at the same time. I might talk about that soon too in another channel. I think somebody had mentioned that before as a suggestion too, the UFOs found on the moon landing. So I might talk about that soon. But let me know what you guys think. Post those comments below. Great stuff so far when it comes to this chapter. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.